Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa, France 24's program focused on the continent. I'm Charlie James and these are the headlines. Zimbabwe's upcoming presidential election has been tainted by allegations of voter tampering. France 24 takes you on the ground with campaigners to examine whether the vote has been free and fair. 24 candidates are running in Mali's presidential race. The two leading competitors are repeat players from 2013. We introduce you to some of the lesser-known candidates. And child malnutrition spikes in Chad, with nutritional centers overwhelmed. We spoke to Doctors Without Borders emergency coordinator about the group's efforts to combat the food crisis. But we begin in Zimbabwe, which on Monday will hold its first election since longtime leader Robert Mugabe was ousted. The race is largely between two men, President Emmerson Mnangagwa, leader of Mugabe's long-ruling ZANU-PF party, and charismatic preacher Nelson Chamisa of the opposition Movement for Democratic Change coalition. Yesterday, Chamisa decided not to boycott the general elections, despite believing the run-up to the vote has been tainted by bias. France 24 takes a closer look at the campaigning.
These campaigners are finding new ways to promote their parliamentary candidate. This 2018 electoral campaign is definitely a first for Fadzai Mahere, an activist who was once imprisoned under Mugabe's regime. She says she has been able to campaign freely.
We've had so much fun. We've managed to connect with people and to introduce a new style. There's a little bit more freedom, but it's not perfect. We still need some more. There's some more changes that still need to happen in order for us to get full freedom.
Zimbabweans will be voting for their MPs and also for their president. But campaigning is unequal and state propaganda questionable. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission has been criticized for not being transparent or independent. The opposition wanted to have access to the voters' roll, saying that they were ghost voters. But Zimbabwean authorities dismiss allegations of vote rigging.
And if there is anything which is not appropriate, then that has got to be taken to the courts.
If tensions persist, human rights organizations fear that it might lead to post-election violence.
We also know that the infrastructure of violence that ZANU-PF, the ruling party, has previously used, remains intact. And in fact, what is happening in a number of rural areas is widespread intimidation.
Apart from diplomats, no citizen living abroad will be able to vote. This represents a quarter of the Zimbabwean population.
Mali is now just 3 days away from its own presidential election. In some ways, this year feels like a rerun of the 2013 race. The two main rivals are once again the incumbent president, Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, and opposition chief, Soumaila Cissa. But 22 other candidates have stepped into the ring. In this report, France 24's team in Mali takes a look at some of them.
A businessman who amassed his fortune in mining, Alio Boubacar Diallo, is running for the first time. Alongside fellow opposition candidate Soumaila Cissa, Diallo's party held demonstrations against President Keita's attempted revision of the constitution last year.
Every party wants its champion. Why would you have just one candidate? That's what helped Keita get elected in the first round. Not having their own candidate in the first round last time put a lot of voters off. Not being able to see your own champion in that first round demotivates people from going out to vote.
When Sheikh Modibo Diarra stood in 2013, he got just 2% of the vote. He was head of the government during the transition period after the 2012 coup d'etat and has teamed up with another former Prime Minister, Moussa Mara, who was in office in 2014. Together, they want to put forward another voice.
The current president and the leader of the opposition are from the same party and have very similar philosophies. It's been the same team leading this country for the last 25 years. That's why today I'm advocating a change to the system.
These candidates are up against two firm favourites, but it's not impossible that an outsider could win.
If you go to a meeting for Somalia Cisse, you will see people there, most likely in return for payment. The very next day, or even the same afternoon, you will see the same people at a rally for Keita. They don't believe in the platform. They come because they hope for something in return. That's one of the problems of the Malian democracy. That's why I say every candidate still has a chance, right down to the last minute.
For these reasons, it's hard to speculate what the outcome will be if the vote goes to a second round in this troubled country.
On Thursday, a Ugandan court validated constitutional changes that removed the presidential age limit. 3 of the 5 judges endorsed a December decision by Uganda's parliament to scrap the age cap. It's a ruling that potentially opens the door for President Yoweri Museveni to extend his 3-decade-long rule. Critics say 73-year-old Museveni wants to be president for life. In Ethiopia, the construction manager of a controversial dam being built on the Nile River has been shot and killed. Semenu Bekele was found dead in his car in the capital. There are fears that the massive Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will reduce Egypt's share of the Nile River water, something Semenu downplayed. On Thursday, hundreds of people marched in Addis Ababa to protest the death. Turning now to Cameroon, where at least 5 people have been killed by devastating floods. A heavy downpour triggered flooding and landslides in the country's southwest region. Nicolas Jamin has the story.
Douala, Cameroon's economic capital, is at a standstill. This is the main entrance to the town. A pipe collapsed because of heavy rains. The situation is chaotic. Cars can no longer use this road. Residents have to carry their goods. Some of them are extremely angry.
The situation is serious. We are disappointed. I don't know if we should be blaming the government or the Cameroonian mentality. It's bad. The company doing the work here is not doing its job.
As you can see, it's a really difficult situation. Right now, cars are banned, and the motorcycle taxis are trying hard to get through. We're stuck here right now.
Traffic is very slow on the main road between Cameroon's 2 biggest cities, Douala and Yaoundé. The government says it must replace hundreds of pipes along this road with stronger material. Here in Limbe, 75 kilometers west of Douala, heavy rains killed several people earlier this week.
Nutritional centers in Chad are once again overwhelmed with an alarmingly high number of children suffering from severe malnutrition. This food emergency is the result of several factors in the country, including inadequate nutritional habits, climate change, and a deep economic crisis. One of the groups working in Chad to combat child malnutrition is Doctors Without Borders. Earlier, I spoke with Natalie Roberts, an emergency coordinator for the organization, about its efforts.
Well, we think there's a nutritional problem all over Chad, as you've already mentioned, but it's clear that there's very much a strong problem in the capital, and partly because there's just more people living there. So while there are high rates of malnutrition all over the country, when you have this high density of population in the capital, you find that there just ends up being an awful lot of children suffering from malnutrition from this disease.
So when children come to this center, what kind of condition are they in? What are their symptoms, and what's done there to help them?
Well, the center we've just opened today is what we call an inpatient therapeutic feeding center. So it's for the children who are really very malnourished, but also very unwell as well. So it's that sort of last stage of malnutrition where they're very much at risk of death. They come in a very critical condition. They're very, very wasted. Some of them have edema, so they're also swollen, and they often have lots of other comorbidities. So they really need to be treated very much as an emergency.
This is not a new problem in Chad, unfortunately. What needs to change structurally in the country to lessen the number of children with inadequate access to food and also repeat cases?
Well, I think one of the main problems we see is actually the care is there, as the centre we just opened today, for the children once they become very, very unwell. There is some amount of care, but there's been a real problem with decentralising that care, with getting to children before they get in this state. When they start displaying some first signs of malnutrition, that's when they really need to be treated and given specialised foods to get them out of this situation. And that's what we're trying to scale up on today as well, is to getting the care closer to those children.
This is not the first time, as we said, but is this specific situation expected to get better soon or worsen?
Well, we see every year in Chad a peak of malnutrition. So we know that this is really the peak time and that it will generally improve about October, November. It coincides also with the peak of malaria in the country. However, we do expect that we will see the same situation in the next year if we again have problems that we've seen this year. So while we will imagine it will get better towards the end of the year, we're very concerned that it will keep happening next year if there's not some sort of structural change.
Children are obviously particularly vulnerable, but I'm guessing this is a problem with the entire population there, correct?
I think the entire population are suffering from what we call food insecurity. So they have just enough money to buy some very basic supplies. The way it affects children is that children need specialized food. They need milk products. They need specialized proteins. And people no longer have the money to buy the food that children need to not become malnourished. So while some of the adults are surviving on basic supplies like maize, really the children need something a bit more substantial.
That's all for this edition of Eye on Africa, but do stay with us here on France 24. There's more news coming up next.